A millionaire pretends to be an ordinary mechanic to find true love, only to discover that the woman he trusted with his heart knew his secret from the very beginning. This emotional love story about betrayal, trust, and sincere feelings will make you question whether money can destroy real love. Richard Page leaves behind his luxurious life and millionaire last name to find a woman who will love him for who he truly is. In the small town of Sunrise Creek, he becomes a simple mechanic and, for the first time in years, feels genuine warmth beside Claudia. Their late-night talks, lakeside evenings, tiny pizza shop dates, and tender moments make him believe that real love finally found him. But one overheard phone call destroys everything. Can true love exist when millions stand behind your name? Can money bring comfort while also destroying trust? And after heartbreaking betrayal, can a wounded heart ever believe in love again? This emotional and heartfelt story about pain, hope, and sincere love will make you think about what it truly means to love a person, not their wealth.
Love Stories Max. Welcome to my channel. Enjoy watching, friends.
He wanted real love without money, but heard the words that destroyed him. Richard Page had been born into a kind of luxury most people only ever saw in magazines. His father, Alex Page, owned hotel chains, high-end restaurants, and construction companies across the country. Their mansion stood on a hill overlooking the ocean, enormous, with glass walls, white marble staircases, and a silence that always felt strangely cold to Richard. At 25, Richard Page had everything other men dreamed about. Expensive cars, his own penthouse in New York, watches that cost as much as small houses. But every time he looked into the eyes of the women he met, he felt like they never truly saw him. They saw his last name. They saw the heir. They saw the bank account. The evening that changed everything was rainy. Beyond the giant panoramic windows, the ocean roared while raindrops slid down the glass in silver streams. Candles flickered along the long dinner table as a housekeeper quietly poured wine, and Richard's mother talked about a charity gala in Boston. Richard barely listened. He stared at his plate, nervously turning his fork between his fingers. "Dad, Mom," he finally said softly, "I'm leaving." His mother looked up in surprise. "On a business trip?" She smiled. "No, leaving home." A silence fell over the room so heavy they could hear the candle crackling. Alex Page slowly set his knife down. "Explain." Richard let out a long breath. "I want to find a woman who will love me, not because of money, not because of my name, not because I'm the heir." His mother forced a nervous smile. "Richard, sweetheart, that sounds like an old movie plot." "Maybe," he answered bitterly, "but I'm tired of it. Women call me every day that I don't even know. They accidentally run into me at restaurants. They send letters, take pictures beside my cars. I don't know if anyone actually sees the real me anymore." His father stayed silent for a long moment. Then he quietly asked, "And what exactly do you want to do?" Richard lifted his eyes. "I want to go somewhere nobody knows who I am." The next morning, he left his black sports car in the garage, put on a plain gray t-shirt, worn jeans, and drove away in an old pickup truck he had bought with cash a few weeks earlier. That was how he ended up in a small town called Sunrise Creek. The town was warm and cozy. Almost everyone knew each other. Bicycles stood outside the coffee shop. Yellow daisies bloomed in flower beds. And in the evenings, people sat on their porches greeting passersby. To Richard, it felt like another world. He rented a tiny room above an old bakery. Every morning, he woke up to the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon. Instead of silk sheets, a simple bed. Instead of a personal driver, an old pickup truck with a broken heater. And for the first time in years, he felt alive. 2 days later, he got a job as a mechanic at a local repair shop called Miller Auto. The owner, a broad-shouldered man named Tom Miller, looked at him suspiciously at first. "Show me your hands," he grumbled. Richard blinked in confusion but held them out. "No calluses," Tom snorted. "You look like a guy who's never held a wrench in his life." Richard only smiled. "Give me a chance." and he truly knew what he was doing. Even as a child, despite growing up rich, he had loved cars. He used to sneak into the garage where an old mechanic repaired his father's vintage collection. That was where he learned to take apart engines faster than most professionals. Within 2 weeks, everyone at the shop respected him. He worked hard, never complained, always helped the others, and even stayed after shifts to organize the tools. And then, one warm morning, an old blue pickup truck rolled into the garage. The engine coughed and rattled like it was seconds away from dying. Richard wiped his hands on a rag and walked over. The truck door creaked open, and a young woman stepped out. Her light chestnut hair was tied into a messy ponytail, a few loose strands falling across her cheeks. She wore denim shorts, a simple plaid shirt, and old cowboy boots. She looked so natural and warm that for a second Richard forgot how to breathe. "Please tell me you can save my old guy," she smiled, patting the hood of the truck. "Depends on how badly he wants to live." Richard grinned. The girl laughed, and that laugh was so genuine it made something tighten inside his chest. "I'm Claudia," she said. "Richard." He opened the hood and immediately recognized the problem. While he worked, Claudia sat nearby on a wooden bench sipping lemonade from a can. Sometimes she asked him questions. Sometimes she simply watched him. "You don't look like a mechanic," she suddenly said. Richard smirked. "Is that a compliment or an insult?" Still deciding, she laughed again, and he noticed the tiny freckle near her lips, and the way she bit her lower lip whenever she got nervous, and the way her fingers played with the ring on her hand. Little things, the exact little things people slowly fall in love with. By the time the repair was finished, the sun had already begun slipping behind the rooftops. Claudia started the engine. The pickup hummed smoothly and steadily. "Wow," she smiled brightly. "You literally saved him." Richard leaned against the truck. "Told you he still wanted to live." For a few seconds, they simply looked at each other. Then Claudia suddenly asked, "Have you eaten dinner yet?" "Not yet." "Then, maybe pizza?" She said it so casually, like she was inviting an old friend. And Richard suddenly realized that nobody had invited him somewhere that sincerely in years. Without an agenda, without a game, without pretending. That evening, they sat together in a small pizza place called Rosie's. The restaurant was old-fashioned, with red checkered tablecloths and faded photographs hanging on the walls. Outside, the neon sign flickered softly while an old blues song played quietly in the corner. Claudia ate pizza with her hands and laughed every time the cheese stretched too far from the slice. "You're way too serious, Richard," she said. "Maybe. You should smile more often." "What if I forgot how?" She leaned a little closer. "You know how. You just forgot." And somehow, those words hit him harder than anything else. They started seeing each other every day. Over time, Richard learned that Claudia loved vanilla ice cream, that she hummed songs whenever she was nervous, that she always helped stray dogs, that someday she dreamed of opening her own tiny flower shop. And Claudia learned that Richard loved late-night drives with no destination, that he hated lies, that sometimes he looked at people with sadness in his eyes, as if he carried something unbearably heavy inside him. One evening, they sat on the hood of his pickup truck beside the lake outside town. Fireflies floated around them in the warm night air. Claudia rested her head against his shoulder. "You know," she whispered softly, "when I'm with you, I feel calm." Richard froze. He looked up at the stars and felt his heart beating faster. Because for the first time in his life, someone had said something like that to him, not because of money, but simply because of who he was. And in that moment, he realized that maybe right there, in Little Sunrise Creek, surrounded by the smell of gasoline, pizza, and warm summer nights, he had finally found what he had been searching for his entire life: real love. Almost a month had passed since Richard Page first saw Claudia pull into the repair shop with her old blue pickup truck. During that time, Sunrise Creek had started feeling like home to him. Every morning he woke up to the smell of cinnamon drifting from the bakery downstairs. Then he headed to the garage, where Tom was usually already grumbling over some old engine. And in the evenings, Richard almost always saw Claudia. They had dinner at Rosie's, walked beside the lake, ate ice cream on benches downtown, and spent hours talking about life. Richard was changing. For the first time in years, he no longer feared silence beside another person. With Claudia, he felt warm. One rainy evening, they sat together inside her small rented house. Rain tapped softly against the roof while the room smelled like chamomile tea and vanilla candles. Claudia seemed unusually quiet. She kept turning her cup nervously in her hands like she was afraid to say something. "Everything okay?" Richard asked softly. She gave him a guilty little smile. "I really hate asking this." Richard immediately set his cup down. "Claudia, what happened?" She lowered her eyes. "I have a few unpaid bills. Lately, I haven't been able to keep up with rent and my mom's medicine. It's not a huge amount." Richard didn't even let her finish. "How much do you need?" Claudia awkwardly told him the amount. To him, it was almost nothing. Without hesitation, he gave her the money from his savings. Claudia nearly cried. She hugged him tightly, like he had just saved her entire world. "You have no idea what this means to me," she whispered, and Richard believed her. Completely. Honestly. A few days later, it happened again. That evening, Claudia called him late at night. Her voice trembled. "Richard, my mom's really sick." He drove over immediately. Claudia sat on the porch steps wrapped in a sweater, her eyes red from crying. "The doctor said she needs to be admitted to a private hospital," she said through tears. "The public hospitals have waiting lists that are too long. I don't know what to do." Richard felt his chest tighten painfully. "How much do you need?" Claudia stayed quiet for a long moment, almost like she was ashamed. $15,000. He froze for only a second. Even for him, that wasn't a small amount anymore. But every time he looked at her tears, his doubts disappeared. "That's basically all my savings," he said quietly. And it was almost true, because he had purposely left most of his real fortune inaccessible so he could live like an ordinary man. Claudia covered her face with her hands. "No, I can't take that." "Yes, you can," he whispered, "if it helps your mother." That night she cried against his shoulder while Richard stroked her hair and thought only one thing. "I want to spend my whole life with her." But somewhere deep inside him, something strange appeared for the first time. Small, barely noticeable, unsettling. Something didn't feel right. Claudia never showed him photos of her mother, never mentioned the hospital's name. Sometimes she mixed up details in her stories. Richard tried not to think about it, because love often blinds people, especially when they're terrified of losing their dream. One warm evening, Richard decided to surprise her. The day at the garage had gone well, and Tom even let everyone leave early. Richard bought a huge bouquet of white and pink peonies, Claudia's favorite flowers. He remembered the way she once smiled and said, "Peonies smell like home." And now he smiled the entire drive to her house. The sky was slowly growing darker. The air smelled like summer evenings and freshly cut grass. Warm lights glowed inside the nearby homes. Richard quietly walked toward Claudia's house. The lights inside were on. The window was slightly open. He was just about to knock when suddenly he heard her voice and froze. Claudia was laughing. Not the way she laughed with him. Different, colder. "I'm telling you, everything's going perfectly," she said into the phone. "I've completely made Richard Page fall for me." Richard's hands instantly went cold. The bouquet slipped slightly from his fingers. His heart slammed painfully against his chest. "Yeah, that Richard Page," Claudia continued. "The richest guy around, pretending to be some regular mechanic." Richard's vision blurred. The world around him suddenly felt distant and muffled. He stopped breathing. "You should see the way he looks at me," she laughed. "He already gave me money, and he'll give me more. He's hopelessly in love with me." Richard felt something inside him slowly breaking apart. Painfully, quietly, like glass cracking deep inside his chest. Every moment they shared flashed through his mind. Her smile, her tears, her hugs, her words beside the lake. "When I'm with you, I feel calm." And now every one of those words cut into him from the inside. Finally, he understood. His secret was out. All this time, Claudia had known exactly who he was. And maybe their entire love story had been nothing more than a beautiful lie. Richard slowly stepped away from the window. The bouquet slipped from his hands onto the wet grass. White peonies scattered into the mud. And he simply stood there in the darkness, staring at the light glowing from her window while feeling his heart completely fall apart. That night, Richard Page couldn't sleep at all. He had turned his phone off the moment he drove away from Claudia's house. He didn't want to hear calls, messages, or explanations, because sometimes words can no longer fix anything. His old pickup truck was parked beside the lake outside town, the same place where they once sat together surrounded by fireflies, where Claudia rested her head on his shoulder and softly whispered that she felt peaceful beside him. Now the place hurt. Richard sat on the hood of the truck, his elbows resting on his knees as he stared at the stars above him. The night was quiet. Only the wind gently moved the grass near the water. And somehow that silence hurt the most. He remembered every little detail. Her smile, her eyes, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she laughed in the small pizza place, the way she fell asleep on his shoulder while summer rain tapped softly outside. And the most painful part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the fact that he had truly fallen in love with her. Completely, honestly, the way he had dreamed about his entire life. Richard let out a shaky breath and rubbed his eyes with his hand. "How can someone do that?" he whispered into the darkness. He couldn't understand how people could play with someone else's feelings, how someone could look into another person's eyes, hold them close, speak softly to them, while secretly thinking only about money the entire time. He had spent his whole life surrounded by wealth, and for the first time, he truly thought about how strange the power of money really was. Money could buy a house, could buy expensive medicine, comfort, security, luxury, could make life easier. But money could never force a heart to love. And at the same time, money was exactly what made people stop trusting each other. Money created lies, masks, fake smiles. Because of money, people started doubting every "I love you." And to Richard, that felt more terrifying than poverty itself. Because a poor person could still be happy, but someone who no longer believed in sincerity almost never could. He stared at the stars and thought about how badly he wanted one simple thing. Not a luxurious wedding, not expensive dinners, not a woman with perfect photos and designer clothes. Just someone who would love him in an old t-shirt, someone who would laugh with him in a cheap diner, someone who would hold his hand not because he was rich, but because she felt cold without him. Richard closed his eyes. His chest still ached, because despite everything, part of him still missed Claudia. Not the real Claudia, but the version of her he had believed in. The girl beside the lake, her warm laughter, the dream he had built in his own heart. And that was when he realized something else. Sometimes people don't fall in love with a person. They fall in love with the feeling that person gave them. Slowly, the horizon above the lake began to brighten. The night was ending. Richard pulled out his phone and stared at the dark screen for a long moment. Then he turned it back on. Messages from Claudia immediately flooded in. "Richard, please let me explain. You misunderstood everything. I can explain." Silently, he closed the messages. Then he called his father. Alex Page answered almost immediately. "Richard." For several seconds, his son stayed silent. Then he quietly said, "Dad." The first attempt failed. His voice sounded calm, but there was so much exhaustion hiding inside that calmness that Alex immediately understood. Richard told him everything. About Claudia, about the money, about the phone call, about how badly the truth had hurt. Silence filled the line. Then his father quietly said, "Son, I'm so sorry." Richard smiled sadly. "You know, I thought after this I'd go back home and never try again. But I won't." No, Dad. I'm still going to find her." "Find who?" Richard looked at the sunrise slowly climbing above the lake. "A woman who'll love me not because of money, not because of my last name, just because I'm me." His father stayed quiet for a long moment, then softly answered, "Then don't give up." That morning, Richard drove to the repair shop one last time. Tom Miller was just opening the garage doors. "What are you doing here so early?" Tom grumbled. Richard stayed silent for a few seconds. "I'm leaving, Tom." The old mechanic frowned. "For good?" Richard nodded. Tom let out a heavy sigh. "Damn. You were a good mechanic." Richard smiled faintly. "You were a good boss." They shook hands firmly, like men who respected each other without needing many words. An hour later, Richard was already driving out of Sunrise Creek. The road stretched endlessly ahead of him. Unknown, empty, but now it no longer scared him. Yes, his heart still hurt a little whenever he thought about Claudia. Sometimes her smile still appeared in his mind, and when it did, something inside him quietly tightened. But Richard knew, time heals even the deepest wounds, especially when a person refuses to stop believing. He kept driving toward a new life, watching the sun rise over the empty highway while thinking only one thing. Someday, he would meet a woman who loved him as sincerely as he knew how to love himself. And when that day came, he would never let her go.